Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time of day it is. Thank you for tuning in to the Conversations with Dr. Don show. The show is produced and broadcast from the Portland, Oregon, USA location. And for your first-time viewers, Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people, like most of you out there, about who they are as unique, one-of-a-kind individuals, and about whatever it is we have decided to talk about. And my guest this evening is Albert Lee. We'll be talking about who he is in the first half of the show, personal bio stuff is what I call it. In the second half, we'll get more in depth about questions that we ask him or whatever he wants to talk about. There's so much stuff you gave me, and boy, like I said, we need about 3 hours to cover you. And you're so interesting. Okay, that's enough of that. We'll get right into it.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to what's going to go on tonight in our interview and what's going to be happening to you in the future in Portland and your activities and the influence that you're going to have on the political climate over a long period of time. That's a prognostication on my part. And I'm blowing smoke at you pretty good, but that's pretty true. You're pretty impressive, and I'm glad. So, how are you feeling right now?
I'm feeling a little warm, and the lights, and this last weekend being 100+ degrees, but other than that, I'm feeling all right. How are you?
I'm a little nervous.
Yeah?
I haven't had you on my show before, so I'm always a little nervous.
I figured you wouldn't be nervous at all. I figured that,
I know you'd think after all these years I'd be calm. And very rarely am I totally calm. It takes me about 3 or 4 minutes, and finally my shoulders drop, and now I'm talking to you and not being so concerned about my image. Can you see my image, what's really going on with me?
I don't know. But I think you're playing a little mental judo with me, because now you're relaxing me as well.
Yeah, okay, cool. Mm-hmm. So let's start now. And Albert Lee, and you're feeling okay now, and you're not nervous, and I am. And, it's going away, see? I say that. If I were to ask your best friend, who is Albert, what would your best friend say? Be your best friend. Albert is what?
Wow.
Well. Occasionally I'll ask you a trick question, and if you don't want to answer them, that's okay.
No, what would my best friend say? That is a good question. The first thing I would have to say is I don't have a best friend.
Pick
I have
one.
many friends, and for me, I have friends around the world, around the country, and I think the first thing that any one of my friends would say about me is that I just love to talk to people. I love to talk to people and get to know folks and understand who they are and where they come from, because I like a good story.
Yeah.
So
a good friend of yours would say that about you.
Yes.
Albert Lee is?
Albert Lee is inquisitive.
That's what I want. Inquisitive, yes.
Inquisitive.
And what else?
Curious, inquisitive, likes games.
Boy, we got some ways to go with that one.
Likes games, likes to explore, likes to try and see new things. Always open to new challenges. I'm always open to, just experiencing life. I think that the world has so much to offer, and folks from around the world have so much to give. And I like to receive and be a receptacle of all of that if I can.
Do you have a lot to give?
I think I do. I think I do. One of the things that I like to do is share. I like to share what I know, share what I have with folks. It's just something that I think has been innate in my upbringing, and it's just something in my nature. It's to share knowledge, to share hobbies. For instance, with my daughter, she's 3 years old.
Yes.
And one of the things that I like to do is I share all of my hobbies with her. So right now at 3, she's ice skating. It's one of the things that I love to do. And I got her on the skates at 2, one for about 5 minutes, and then last winter when she was 3, I got her on skates, and she liked it. We went and took some lessons, and now at least once a week we go skating together.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's her name?
Cora.
Cora.
Okay.
When and where were you born?
I was born in 1975 in Seoul, South Korea.
South Korea.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. How'd you happen to be born there?
Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. The most direct way to answer that question is my father was a U.S. Army soldier. He was enlisted in the late 60s, early 70s. He was stationed in Korea. He met my mother in South Korea, and they fell in love, and one thing led to another, and knock, 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 here I am. Yeah.
Brothers and sisters?
I have one younger sister. So she is 22 months younger than me. I like to say 2 years younger than me, but she makes it a very solid point that she's 22 months younger than me. Yeah.
So, why were you born?
I'm sorry?
Why were you born?
Why? Love.
What does that mean? Love is why you were born?
Love is why I was born.
What does that mean?
It means that my mom and my dad fell in love. And I'm the product of that expression of love. I am a product of that union, something that's, incredible, quite honestly. My father is an African American, he died recently, about a year and almost 2 years ago now.
Oh, sorry about that.
It's life.
How's your recovery from that loss?
Well, it's funny you ask, because I've been estranged from my father for, I'd say, about 20 years. And then saw him as I was making my way back to Oregon when my wife and I drove cross country with my daughter. My sister, who had been in contact with my father, let me know that he had had a stroke.
Oh boy.
And
how old was he?
63.
Young man.
Yeah. And so she gave me his phone number because I didn't have it, having not been keeping in touch with him. And I sat on his phone number. I sat on his phone number for about 3 weeks. And I thought, because we really were estranged. We really didn't have, we hadn't spoken in about 20 years. And
my gosh.
And I didn't know if I really wanted to speak to him. I didn't know if I wanted to have him enter my life again. At the same time, I knew how serious the situation was with his stroke, and he had diabetes. And, my sister just communicated to me how very deathly ill he was. And after those 3 weeks, I ended up picking up the phone and calling him. And it was distant, I was on the East Coast and he was in St. Louis. The first thing I recalled was his voice. His voice just sort of triggered, past memories, good stuff, bad stuff. Sure. And in the end, it was easy to talk to him. I made mention to him that we were traveling cross country, making our big move back to Oregon from the D.C. area. And I told him that, he'd get a chance to see his granddaughter. And so that made him very, very happy. And to be quite honest, I was very, very nervous.
Of course.
The reason why we were estranged was we had domestic violence issues in the house.
Sure.
And this occurred while I was in high school, while I was a sophomore in high school. This was early 90s. This was before the Violence Against Women's Act. So my father was riffed out of the Army, reduction in forces.
Yes, yes.
He was riffed out of the Army at 18 years. So this was at a time, I think it was Rumsfeld who was Secretary of the Army or Defense or one of those things. And they were looking for ways to cut back on military expenditures, which of course I think is a great thing. But
his pension's gone.
The way that they handled it was different. Instead of, cutting the unnecessary toys and expensive weaponry, they decided to focus on those folks that were nearing pension because of, having that lifelong pension to deal with. They figured they could cut some staff, reduce those forces. So there was actually a class action lawsuit from a lot of folks that were riffed out, near retirement. I don't think any of them really went anywhere, but unfortunately my father was one of those guys that got riffed out prior to the pension. And this is for someone who volunteered in the middle of Vietnam. Someone who, didn't wait for a draft, but actually volunteered to join the service. I
did that many, many years ago too.
Yeah.
World War II.
Yeah. So, while there were plenty of folks that were trying to, evade or, find a way out, he joined. And he joined in 68 or 69, one of those years. Trying to figure out my math on that. Was it 70? Anyways, at any rate, the reason why he joined was a little difficult as well. I mean, he was growing up in a very segregated St. Louis, and he graduated high school from a really, really impoverished school district. There weren't very many opportunities for, an African American man in St. Louis in the late 60s. Low draft number meant that you would probably go to Vietnam.
Yeah.
So, if you're being rational, you would volunteer because you have a better chance of maybe not going to Vietnam, maybe going to somewhere like Korea, which is what happened. So when he volunteered, he was able to learn a trade. He became a mechanic in the Army, and he didn't go to Vietnam. He went to Korea, and it's the reason why I'm here speaking to you today.
I need to remind you, if I didn't mention it, I should have, that if I ask you a question that is uncomfortable, you don't want to answer, you don't have to.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
How bright are you? What's your IQ?
Will
you divulge that?
You know what? I can tell you my sister's IQ, but I can't tell you mine.
Will you do that?
Yeah, she's in the she's Mensa. She's like
betcha.
176 or something like that.
You betcha.
She's brilliant. Me, not so much.
Yeah, I enjoy testing my ability to do what I did many years ago as a psychologist. And before I'd administer my battery of tests that measure all these kinds of things, IQ, I would spend 4 or 5 minutes or so with my patient or client, depending on the patient, and make a guesstimate, and then administer my tests and see how close I came with the many years of practice. And I was pretty good. I'm bragging, So I do it unconsciously now, depending on, especially if someone appears to be brighter than the average bear, then I have to make my guesstimate, even though I don't say it out loud. And I'm pretty good. And you're damn smart. Pardon my,
well,
that's a high compliment. And I'm smart enough to know that I'm smarter than the average bear, but nowhere near people like you. So I have enough IQ to be able to make some accurate guesstimates, especially with all my training. But it's a pleasure for me to tell you, if you haven't had a professional tell you how bright you really are, you know how smart you are.
Well, thank you,
It's
Doctor.
impressive. You
Yeah.
bet. I'm done, of course. Yeah. Right. You talked a little bit about your racial heritage, and anything comes to mind about cultural heritage?
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, growing up, I grew up mainly in St. Louis,
Mm-hmm.
and in St. Louis, I was an anomaly, to say the least. You know, having a black father and a Korean mother, and growing up in North County, St. Louis, which was mainly an African American community even then. So, you know, Ferguson.
Yeah.
We lived really close to Ferguson in a place called Moline Acres, and my father bought a house, or my parents bought a house in Moline Acres, mainly because when my father was growing up in Kinloch, which is on the other side of Ferguson, Moline Acres was the sort of like the target or the goal, or you know, the ideal place to live. And there was nothing really special about the place. It was tract housing from the 1950s, ranch-style housing.
Mm-hmm.
But to a poor kid in Kinloch, you know, Moline Acres was palatial. It was something that was great. And I forgot the name of the basketball player, but it was the first African-American basketball player that played for the St. Louis Hawks before they moved to Atlanta. Wilkins, I can't think of his name, but he was the first black guy to buy a place in Moline Acres, and this was in the 60s, maybe, and it caused a great stir, and it was the start of white flight, and this is you know, a star basketball player for the basketball team at the time.
Mm-hmm.
When we moved in I want to say it was 79 or 80. I was like 4 or 5 years old. It was still predominantly white, but as families like mine moved in, there it was obvious white flight was occurring.
Yeah.
The entirety of North County went from a mixed population to predominantly black over the course of my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And the majority of the folks that lived there ended up moving further west, West County, St. Charles, St. Peter's, and now I went and visited 2 weeks ago and saw some old friends and family in St. Louis, and it's amazing. The entirety of North County is now almost 100% black, and the suburbs have pushed further and further west to the point where Wentzville is considered a suburb of St. Louis now, when it's, you know, it's almost 2 hours out to the west of the city.
You refer to yourself as a person of color,
Mm-hmm.
POC, and I've not seen that before. And I heard you mention black and then African American.
Mm-hmm.
I've had some difficulty, because I'm racially mixed, of course.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer saying black for me.
Sure.
Racially, I'm red, white, and black racially.
Mm-hmm.
And ethnically, I'm not sure what the hell I am because of my mixtures and being brought up in New Orleans.
Creole.
Where,
Yeah.
And if you were smart enough and genetic inheritance worked out, then succeeding generations were light-skinned enough and then become white, you know.
Mm-hmm. Pass.
Passing, yeah.
Pass,
Pass,
yeah.
that's a blanc.
Mm-hmm.
So, I forgot where I was going with that.
Identity.
Religious preference. You have a religious preference nowadays.
Haha. So, I have a kind of crazy path with religion.
Mm-hmm.
My mother's side, and this is pretty typical for Koreans, evangelical, like Christians. You know, her father, I believe, was a Presbyterian minister. At the same time, there's some Buddhist influence in the family from my mother's side. My father's side, my great-grandfather was sort of the patriarch of the family, and he took us under his wing, and we went to Memorial Tabernacle Baptist Church in Kinloch, and he was one of the founders there, so I got to sit in the front pew with him for service. And so that's where my religious life began. Was with my great-grandfather growing up.
And he was black.
And he was black. And Cherokee and something else, Creek. I mean, green eyes. I mean, he's, you know, he was born in I want to say he was born in Alabama, and he moved up to St. Louis in the 1910s.
Was he pretty bright too?
I think so. With every year that passes, I lose more and more of him. I used to remember how his voice sounded. I can't recall what his voice sounds like. I used to remember, you know, his smell, everything. But now I'm left to images of what he looked like. And so I just remember his horn-rimmed glasses, his green eyes, and he was always chewing on beech nut, tobacco.
Did you like him?
I loved him.
I could tell.
I loved him.
I was here to say it.
He was the best. I just remember going fishing with him at Spanish Lake, and I'd be frustrated. I'd cast that pole out and get nothing. I was scared to put the worm on, and called me a sissy for not putting the worm on. I remember that. But it seemed like magic because Papa, he'd put his rod in, pull out, rod in, pull out. And he'd catch bluegill all day long, just like that. And he'd like 30 or 40 fish. I never caught a fish. Never.
Okay.
Yeah.
Religious preference now.
Oh yeah. So it was Baptist. You know, it was not.
Yeah.
It wasn't. I used to say Southern Baptist. I don't think it was Southern Baptist. It was just Baptist. And when I was in kindergarten, my mom took me out of public school, and she put us in the Catholic schools because that was the alternative to public school. And when I was in kindergarten, they wanted to put me in second grade, and she was like, "No, that's not going to happen." She was concerned about me being able to deal socially with kids significantly older than me.
Yes.
And you know, she had the foresight to see that the school district wasn't great, and she needed to figure out a way to get us better education. So she took a second job. She worked in the daytime with a local nursing home. She was a cook at a local nursing home. And then at night, she worked at Arby's. So I remember fond memories of having Arby's sandwiches on a regular basis. Yeah, I've tried to eat those recently, not so good. But
I know, I can tell.
But they were good back then, and so she took that second job, and of course my dad was in the Army, so he was overseas while we were all in his hometown of St. Louis, and used that to pay for my sister and I to go to Catholic school. And it was during Catholic school that I converted in 4th grade to Catholicism. And I converted for 3 really rational reasons. So the first reason, I told you I had to sit in the front pew with my great-grandpa at church.
Yeah.
What I didn't tell you was it was in a wool suit. There was no air conditioning. And church went on from like 7:30 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. First you had Sunday school, and then you had something else, and then you had the main church, and then 2 o'clock you got to go home to have dinner. Then you had to come back after dinner to go to have more church.
Oh, poor baby.
So that's all day Sunday. Catholics, in and out, 1 hour.
1 hour.
And you don't wear a suit. So that was number 1.
I was a Roman Catholic kid myself. I was an altar boy for years.
Yeah, I was an altar boy too. So the second reason, during those sermons, without the air conditioning, you're pouring down with sweat. The preacher was on the pulpit. He had a big old pitcher of ice water in a glass, and that pitcher of ice water would just sweat, you know, with condensation. And as the perspiration is dripping off your face, you're watching that pitcher sweat, longing. Meanwhile, the preacher is preaching fire and brimstone, telling about damnation and how we're all sinners and we're all going to hell, right? Catholics, You go in a little box. You talk to the priest. You tell your sins. Your slate is wiped clean. You just go say 3 Hail Marys, and your slate is wiped clean, and you don't have to go to hell. So that was number 2.
Yeah.
Number 3, in 4th grade, my teacher was Sister Marcella Polizzi, Italian nun, Sacred Heart of Jesus. And she pulled me aside one day at recess, and she said, and she was a salesman. She was one of these that always, whenever she had class, she would ask everybody in class in 4th grade, who wants to become a priest? And everybody would raise their hand.
Of course.
Who wants to become a nun? And everybody would raise their hand. And she said, that's good, children. But she pulled me aside one day at recess, and she said, Albert. Yes, Sister Marcella. You fancy Colleen, don't you? Yes, Sister Marcella. You know, if you want to marry her, you got to be Catholic. So that was 3. 1, 2, 3. Very logical reasons to convert. And so I converted, and, it was, going to Catholic school. If you're not Catholic, you go to Mass, everybody else goes to have communion, you sit down, and you feel out. So it felt good to be a part of the in crowd for once.
Sure.
And then after the domestic violence issues with my family, we left. My mom, my sister, and I, we ran away. And we lived in our car, and we lived in some shelters. And we lived in Pennsylvania. We ended up coming back to St. Louis for a spell. Didn't work out, so we had to leave again. We ended up in Kansas City. And all the while, my whole life was, in disarray. My sister's life was in disarray. She sort of embraced her religion even more so, and delved deeper into her faith. Whereas for me, I was like, this isn't working.
I know.
And the hell with this.
I'm a recovering Catholic.
Yeah, same here. So to answer your question in a long roundabout way, I don't have any faith right now. I consider myself an atheist or a humanist, if you want labels, but...
Or names.
Yeah, yeah. So that's where I'm at.
A skeptic, agnostic, atheist. And instead of atheist is a difference. And people ask me, what does that mean? Because an atheist is a pejorative. And I did my Cornel West for a moment. Where did you get that? He's one of my heroes.
Yeah, he's good.
So, education. You want to say some more about your education? There's a lot of stuff you said about your education.
Yeah, sure. And I told you I grew up and went to Catholic schools all my life. And when I was a senior in high school, it was my 5th high school. It was I went to 4 different high schools, but it was my 5th high school. I went to one high school twice when I came back from Pennsylvania and went back to the original high school.
Yeah.
But as I entered my 5th high school, my senior year of high school, and that's got to be the worst time to start a new school, right?
Yes.
After 4 years, everyone's
and
bonding.
A whole new crowd.
Yeah, so I was definitely an outsider, and I was working at the grocery store and a gas station to help my mom support us, because after a good family helped us out after we got out of the shelters, a good family, the Panabiancos, took us in to their home, and we lived with them for about 3 months. And they helped us find a 2-bedroom basement apartment that we could afford, and it was like amazing. It was awesome. And my mom took 2 jobs. She worked as a cook at a daycare, and she worked at the grocery store, and I worked at the grocery store also, and the gas station to help pay the bills. But it was during that senior high school. I just really felt like I'd probably be working at this grocery store and this gas station for the rest of my life. And I was really feeling really down. And I was feeling, especially because I'd always gone to good schools. I went to college prep, high school, and you talk to me my freshman or my sophomore year of high school, I'd name the schools that I was planning on, trying to get into.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's 1993, and I'm happy that we have an apartment, and I'm happy that we, are making it. But I didn't have any illusions about college. I didn't think I was going to be going to college. And my mom's a really good friend, Miss Mary. I still call her Miss Mary, and that's who I saw in St. Louis a couple weeks ago. She called me up and she said, "Now, Albert, I don't know if you're going to finish college, but I know you're going to go at least 1 year." And she gave me a lot of money. She gave me $10,000. She gave me $10,000 to go to school. And she's not a woman of means. I don't know where she had that money. And she said, "You better take the SAT, ACT, and you better apply to school because you're going to go at least once, at least 1 year." So she lit a fire in me. I was happy. I was ecstatic. I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I applied. I applied to schools far, far away. And she got me to go first year and took more loans, and finished off school eventually. So I was the first in my family to go to college and actually graduate. My sister followed, and then she was the first to go to graduate school, and I followed her and went to law school. So I started off undergrad at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University down in Daytona Beach, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I thought I wanted to be an aerospace engineer. So I took aerospace engineering and engineering physics, and quickly realized that math was not my strong suit. Switched over to political science when I transferred to Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And my grades improved dramatically. After college, I wanted to go to the Foreign Service. I wanted to go see the world, without a gun. And so I went through that process. It was a long, long process. It was back then. It was everything was filled in and you sent it in the mail, not like today where everything's online. And filled out my application, took the test, passed. They send you something in the mail, says pick where you want to go do your final assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's sort of a quadrant where they had Washington and San Francisco and Chicago and New Orleans. So living in Omaha, Nebraska, I figured, well, I can make it to Chicago.
Sure.
So I picked Chicago. And about a month before the assessment, you get something in the mail that says, "Thank you, you've been selected. Please report to Washington, D.C." And I said, "Washington, D.C.?" So I called them up, and I said, "There's some kind of mistake. I applied to do the assessment in Chicago." And the staffer on the phone told me, "Well, yeah, we decided to have everybody come to D.C." I was like, "Oh, great." Now, I couldn't afford to get to D.C. I barely had enough money to get a suit, and I figured I could scratch up some gas money to drive to Chicago. And so I said, "Is there any way that I could defer this assessment?" It's like, "No, you can apply again next year." So this is when they did it once a year. Now I think they do it 3 times a year. So I was crushed, and I looked for anything that I could do to fix this, and there was no way to fix it. And my school loans started coming due. I freaked out, and I joined the Army. I went to a strip mall recruiter, and they signed me up.
What?
Yeah, they promised me the world. They promised me all this cash up front, and school loans would be repaid.
Mm-hmm.
So I took their test, and flying colors, got 99th percentile in the ASVAB.
Mm-hmm.
So that qualified me to do anything, right?
Oh.
So I said, okay, let's go with foreign attaché. which would be comparable to a State Department diplomat.
Of course.
No, sorry, that's closed. Military intelligence, closed. Linguist? No, we don't need any of those. What's open? You know the answer to this, right? Infantry? Artillery? Scout? So, the recruiter knew he had me in a pickle already, so I picked the infantry. I said, well, if I'm going to do combat arms, might as well go all the way, right? So I signed up for infantry and ranger school and airborne school and all of that. So signed up, and as a consolation, Staff Sergeant Gull, I remember you. He was like, you got a college degree, so we'll make you an E4 specialist. So, bump me up 4 ranks from a private, which didn't mean no good in the end. But yeah, so I made it to the Army. 10 years later, after business and everything, I ended up going back to school. And I ended up going back to law school. So this was after, 10 years after undergrad. So, and I ended up going to law school at George Washington University, in D.C. So I gave you another long-winded answer to.
And I love it.
To your question.
Yeah.
But so I'm a first-generation college grad and a first-generation law school grad.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And you are doing what to earn a living nowadays?
So when my wife and I returned to Portland, we started our own small business. And it's a digital design and branding agency, One Plum Design, so web and graphic design. So that we're in our 3rd year now, and
it's working.
It's working.
Wow.
We're a women-owned business, WBE certified, MBE certified, ESB, which is Emerging Small Business certifications from the state of Oregon. We work with small businesses like ourselves, organizations, nonprofits, and for-profits as well. So the majority of our customers are here in Portland, in the Portland metropolitan area. We still have some folks on the East Coast that we work with, but the majority of the folks that we work with are here.
Will you be expanding or getting bigger?
Yes. So we recently converted one of our interns to a full-time employee. We've taken on a couple more interns. We're bringing on a sales guy, and we'll probably have to bring on some more staff as well because I'm leaving.
Where are you going?
So for the last several months, I've been in process with Portland Community College. And I recently received and accepted the offer to become the new dean, division dean of business and computing at Sylvania.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We got to stay in touch. I got to see what's going on with you and your career. And you have a partner, of course, a wife, a boyfriend, girlfriend. Cover all the bases here,
Yeah, sure. My wife and I own One Plum Design together. And we, like I mentioned earlier, we have a 3-year-old daughter, Cora, who keeps us busy. Between the business and my daughter and our daughter, we are pretty full.
Your political persuasion, are you left, right, or center, or what?
That's a good question. I don't really like the left-right spectrum.
Give me another one.
The one that I really like is the political compass, which gives you the left, right, plus it gives you an X and a Y axis. And where I fall on that is sort of lower left. So the left right is the X axis, and the Y axis is more authoritarian or less. So very low authoritarian.
Can you simplify that for me?
Sure. I would be in line with Bernie. I would be in line pretty much with Bernie Sanders. Also Tulsi Gabbard, folks like that. Cornel West.
What about William F. Buckley? I've always admired him hugely. Never mind. Okay. Memberships, political, social, or civic organizations that you care to mention right now.
Sure. So I will start with civic organizations. I am a member of the Urban League of Portland, the Korean American Association, Coalition of Oregon, Korean American Coalition of Oregon, the NAACP Portland chapter. Those are the three civic political organizations that I am involved with. Are Bernie PDX, which is an upstart political organization that came about during the 2016 election. I've been going to Progressive Party meetings. I've met you there at one of the Progressive
Oregon
Party
Progressive Party.
I am also involved with a lot of other progressive groups, including like Portland Forward. And, you know, just other non-formal groups. So, you know, there's a couple of different organizations for creatives of color. There's other organizations of political progressive activists. But
Do you have time to sleep?
you know, I do sleep, but I try my best to, you know, to be quite honest with you, I hadn't been really politically active.
Sure. It's too busy.
Well, like most Americans, I think I was pretty apathetic about a lot of things. And during the 2016 election, it was actually the first time I ever donated money to a politician. And I donated to Bernie Sanders 12 separate occasions.
Albert, the time is running out. We've just touched on you. Hopefully you'll agree to come back and talk some more about what else is going on. But let's continue with what we can now for the rest of the time we have together. You're just fascinating. Persons, let's take a break, a short break here for a few minutes, okay? Okay, we're back. So those of you who are tuning in late and missed the opening of the show, you're watching Conversations with Dr. Don. Conversations with Dr. Don is an ongoing series of one-hour standalone talk shows where I interview interesting people like my guest this evening, Albert Lee, about who he is and whatever it is we're going to be talking about in the little time we have left. And one more question to cover the first half. Any heroes or people you look up to, any names come to mind now from the past or even alive today?
Sure. You know, there are so many people that I've come across that touched my life. One of the folks that we talked about earlier has been my great-grandfather. He was an incredible person. He lived to be almost 100 years old. Outlived several wives. Did a lot of different things. He lost a finger while working on the railroad. There was one thing I remembered. He had this stubby ring finger that had this weird nail that grew out of it. But he was, there's always this talk about not having black male role models, and he was my black male role model. He was a strong man. He was a quiet guy. He wasn't a talker. He was a doer. He got things done, and he had discipline. He got up early in the morning, and he led by example. So, for a personal hero, it would be my great grandfather, Philip Prince. Philip Prince. Aside from him, there are so many interesting folks here. You can just pick throughout history from Nelson Mandela on. Some of the folks that I like now, Ta-Nehisi Coates, incredible guy.
Yeah.
I got a chance to read the book.
Yes.
Amazing, right on point. I really think that it should be something that should be read by everyone.
Now, talking about books, we got to say at least a word or two about this book here that you brought with you. You're about to reread.
Yes.
I'll read it again for the second time.
You're More Powerful Than You Think, Citizen's Guide to Making Change Happen by Eric Liu.
And why are you reading it a second time?
So, I don't think you can really do justice to a book just reading it through once cover to cover. I think especially with something that has a lot of information, you got to read it a couple times to really digest and really get to the kernel of truth and really understand what all is in there, because it's only 200 some pages. Yeah, barely 200 pages, but it is completely compact. I mean, it's full, it's dense with material.
Yeah.
So this book, it starts off talking about migrant farm workers in Southwest Florida. And these are folks that lived or picked tomatoes and lived in basically slave conditions.
Yes.
They get their wages were by the parcel, not by the hour. Their living conditions, they were basically living where they worked. They had to go to the store, the company store. I mean, I can't believe we're still talking about company stores and things like this in 2017.
Yeah.
But and on top of that, they had their wages garnished by the very people that they're supposed to.
It seems I've read this story somewhere.
Yeah. So these folks, these are some folks that you would think have absolutely no power. These are folks that you would believe would not be able to do anything except for just continue to exist miserably. And the story starts off about talking about how a couple of folks got up and said, hey, demanded their wages. Hey, we need just some basic shade for our breaks. And under the hot sun, can you give us at least some basic shade? And what it came down to was these people came together and organized, and they took and created collective power. And they were able to change their situation. They were able to right those wrongs. They
Kind
were
of
able.
like Mondragon.
Yes, and so that was the first story in this book, as Eric Liu goes and breaks down what power is. And one of the things that he expresses at the very beginning is that power is not good or evil. Power is just like, it's a tool, right? It's like fire. Fire can be used for good, or it can be used for evil. It's how you use it. But more to the point, you don't need to worry about taking power or possessing power. But the reality is that every one of us has power. And the reality is that we are more powerful than we think, and that we can affect change, and that we can move things forward, even when the outcome looks bleak, even when people say that you're ridiculous. I mean, you can give an example. The Bernie Sanders effect is one. Before Bernie, nobody was talking about, $15 minimum wage. Nobody was talking about free college tuition or universal health care. Now, all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it.
You're fortunate. I don't know what it is about you that you apparently have emotional intelligence and you're emotionally literate. And that's kind of sparing nowadays, particularly in our be strong American culture. And I see myself similar in that regard. Permission to feel and experience what's going on and to react to someone who's that way. I'm enjoying you emotionally as well as intellectually. And we got maybe about 5 minutes more to talk about a whole list of questions here. So you remember, let's take one or two of those that you will respond to now.
Okay.
And I don't want to pressure you. We'll talk a little more about when you can come back on again and resume this. I'd like to do that pretty soon. Can we do that?
Yeah,
maybe?
sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why you
look
want me back,
good.
but
Hey, I know what I'm doing, man. I know what I'm doing. All right. What do you want to talk about now in the next few minutes? Where do you see yourself in 10 years?
oh, 10 years.
Your question.
Yeah, you're right. 10 years from now, I hope to see myself here in Oregon. I've come back here twice. There's got to be a reason why I came back here twice, right?
Yeah.
This place is beautiful. I mean, you know, Oregon, we have beautiful climate, we have beautiful weather, we have beautiful people. Obviously, we have lots of issues as well, but that's not a reason to leave. You know, I think that 10 years from now, my daughter is going to be a teenager. I'd like to be here and really affect change. I'd like to help make this place a better place, make this a better Oregon.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there was a sparkle, a shine, if you will, about this place when I first came.
Yes.
And the reason why I first came here was because I could not afford to live in Washington, D.C. and I read a couple different books. I'm a book reader. I read The Geography of Nowhere and The Power of Place. I also took an online survey at findyourspot.com. And that survey and these books pointed me to the Pacific Northwest. Mm-hmm. My top 5 on that survey, on that online survey, were Portland, Seattle, San Francisco, Albuquerque, and Chicago. Mm-hmm. Now, Albuquerque and Chicago were probably anomalies. Couldn't afford to live in San Francisco, so that pretty much boils it down to Seattle and Portland. And having lived in large cities, I kind of like smaller cities, you know? I think that Portland is the right size. It's getting a lot bigger now, but compared to relative to Seattle, I'll take Portland any day.
So I guess you told me a little about why you love Portland and what brought you back to Portland. What are the challenges, at least 2 or 3 that you can name? You're being part of Portland. Mm-hmm. Do you see yourself in politics or taking another direction to see improving what Portland's about?
Sure. Well, first of all, as I mentioned before, I hadn't been politically active before 2016. And 2016 really was a time where I became more active. I started donating money. I started actually donating my time and volunteering, phone banking and pamphleting and trying to do my best to persuade folks to do and vote as I would like them to. That being said, now I've joined a lot of different organizations, and there are so many good organizations out there that really are doing things. The Progressive Party, for one. I was surprised. I've gone to 2 meetings now just to listen to all of the legislation, all of the legislation and balloting that they are doing both locally and at the state level, keeping their eyes and ears to the ground and listening to things that are coming down the pipeline. And you know, these are things that most of us just don't do. We don't listen to these things. We ignore it, and by ignoring
chatter.
It's a lot of noise and a lot of things, and we've all got things to do in our everyday life. But the reality is, when we're not looking, bad things happen.
I know. we got to stop you now because I want you to take a minute or more to talk to the viewers in that camera there about anything you want to talk about right now, just in a minute or so we have, because you'll be coming on again pretty soon.
Okay.
But just for now, just be spontaneous.
Sure. You're going to put me on the spot, and I'm going to do my best. But I'd like to say that for anyone and everyone, I think this book right here really does say it all. You are more powerful than you think. We really need to do things. Even if you think that it's impossible, even if you think that it might be a little silly, I really would like to extend that challenge to you, is to go ahead and, regardless of how ludicrous, how impossible, how silly you think it is to do, to try. Because you and I, we all possess way more power than we actually think we do, and we can really affect real change in our communities and throughout the world.
You're turning me on again. So let's do a couple PSAs to make up for some interruption we had. I want to tell you about the ACLU. I've been a member of the American Civil Liberties Union for many, many years, and I'll be a member till I die. The ACLU is so terribly important. And we have to end corporate personhood to show that corporations are not persons and money is not speech. Go to movetoamend.org so we can take back our country. And thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed Albert as much as I did.
I did.
And remember KFC. Oh, not Kentucky Fried Chicken, Dr. Don's KFC. Kind, friendly, and charitable. Be kind, be friendly, and be charitable to you too, and you especially. We will see you next time. Thank you again for watching. Good night.